And even the Beastie Boys loved sampling the Beatles too.
Oh my God, Paul's Boutique, like, the sampling laws changed, but to make Paul's Boutique today would be impossible. Like, it's grandfathered in, and I think there's a relationship with Capitol, but like that album is made up entirely of samples.
Youngsters from Liverpool, England. The Beatles have held this title for 8 years. My model of business is the Beatles. You know, look, they were four very talented guys.
Welcome back to the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Jack Lawless. First, I'd like to thank you all for the overwhelming support of this podcast and Twitter page. We recently reached over 100,000 followers, and we are now one of the top Beatles podcasts on the internet. I love that this podcast and our Twitter page brings hundreds of thousands of Beatles fans from across the world together to share our love for the Beatles every day. It's wonderful to see a worldwide community built around timeless music and something that means a lot to all of us. Today I'd like to welcome Jake Fogelnest onto the show. Jake is an Emmy Award nominated writer, producer, and broadcaster who had his own show called Squirt TV on MTV in the 90s and has since worked on shows such as Comedy Central's Corporate, Marvel's Runaways, and Wet Hot American Summer. Jake's a huge Beatles fan and loves all kinds of music. That's why I'm really excited to have him on the podcast this week.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Jake, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
I'm good. I was excited to do this. You've had such a range of guests. Some are longtime friends of mine. Mark Frost, co-creator of Twin Peaks, and you asked, and I said, "Sure, I'll talk about the Beatles with you. Why not?"
Awesome. So, Jake, what was the first time that you ever heard the music of the Beatles?
See, this is I was thinking about it, and I honestly cannot remember a time without the Beatles. I was born in March of '79, so the Beatles had been broken up, but they had their albums and their solo work. It was just there was no life without the Beatles. Like, my first sort of conscious memory of the Beatles and listening to them that I can sort of piece together is I had the standard Fisher Price record player and a copy of the White Album, which was probably a really good pressing, like from that should not have been on a Fisher Price record player. And I remember listening to it, and I don't know how old I must have been, but that's sort of the first conscious memory I have of listening to the Beatles, just sort of by myself, with obviously from my mother's record collection. Um, Getting into it, maybe I was trying to play it backwards to hear Revolution number 9, although I don't know how I would have even known about that. It might have been, I don't remember. The Beatles music has always been with me.
And what were your thoughts when you first heard them?
As a very young person, there was always music in my house, but something stood out to me that the Beatles were the best band. I don't think it was anything that was told to me by an adult or my parents or anything. I It's 1979 when I'm born. The Knack is out. My Sharona. That's like a song that was popular in the year that I was born. The other stuff would be, I think, I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. And then as I start to like get into like conscious memories of being a child, I know like the first 45 I had was Casey and the Sunshine Band's Boogie Shoes. And I remember buying like Hall and Oates' Private Eyes album at Sam Goody, but there was something about, like, this was new music and it was good and I liked it. But the Beatles was like, I just sort of like had this sort of spiritual knowing that the Beatles were the best band and that they were no longer together. I knew that they had broken up, and I had known sadly that one of them had passed away, but I think I just sort of knew the Beatles were the best band. So I think that it's almost like a spiritual consciousness thing, as a little kid, because when you see little kids love the Beatles. There are people who are like, I don't like the Beatles, and I'm like, really, you don't like the Beatles? Like, you think that they're the worst band? They suck. Like, I think that's a attitude that is people put on airs. And it's like, you can't find one. I'm not saying every Beatles song is a classic. I'm just saying their batting average is pretty good, you know?
Definitely. Yeah.
and they sort of, even when they sort of borrowed from other artists or took influences from their other contemporary artists at the time, they still took it to the next level, like, and, but when you're a little kid, you don't know about any of this stuff. You don't know, about Brian Wilson and Pet Sounds and
Yeah.
and his, battles with Phil Spector in his brain. You don't know about that as a little kid, but if you look at little kids, they love the Beatles, and not just Yellow Submarine, the songs that are more like kid friendly, like, Put on Rain for a little kid, and I think their ears just perk up. It's the harmonies, it's the melodies. It is just something in me, I guess, spiritually, from God, from whatever, was just like, no, the Beatles is for you. And I think that I'm not unique in having that experience. I think that that's a pretty common experience, but I don't have this like early childhood memory of like, ooh, discovering like the Monkees 100%.
Oh, interesting.
That I remember, I could tell you, it was like, oh, I saw the Monkees on MTV and fell in love with the Monkees, and it was right as they were having their 1987 reunion. It was Monkey Mania sort of hit again in 1986, 1987. But before that, the Beatles, it's just sort of like, no, always there, always in the ether.
I think that's a great point you bring up because I agree. Like, little kids are drawn to the Beatles. I know I certainly was. And it makes me wonder, like, what's different about them? And I think you're right. It has to be spiritual because there are a lot of groups that are influenced by the Beatles, but I don't think it's common for kids to want to listen to like Oasis.
Exactly. It makes me, when you look at the footage of Beatlemania, for me, I'm a big fan of the band Devo. And in the mid 2000s, Devo weren't touring that actively. But then all of a sudden they were going to play Central Park. And holy crap, I'm going to see Devo live. And the Yeah Yeah Yeahs opened up, and I saw Devo for the first time live. And I had the experience for myself of, oh, that footage that I've seen on Ed Sullivan of girls screaming and guys screaming, I get it now. Because I was like, I've had that happen to me only a couple times. Like, I saw Devo, which happens to be a favorite band of mine. And then I went to see Prince in Austin, Texas at it was a very small venue. I was very lucky to get in. Ryan, the guy who used to run Pitchfork, helped me get into this secret Prince concert. And it's like, I knew I was going to see Prince. There was a sign outside that said Prince. And then somebody said, ladies and gentlemen, Prince. And then Prince walked out on the stage, and I went, oh my God, it's Prince. There he is. Like, I would have been like more shocked if E.T. had walked out on the stage. It was like, wow, that's Prince.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like, nobody has come close to repeating the success of the Beatles. We've seen a lot of great bands that have been influenced by them, but like they were the first. We're still to this day endlessly interested about their music and re-examining it. And when we got to finally see what Peter Jackson did with Get Back, it was sort of like, oh, finally, this footage that we've been waiting to see. Like for me, I was like, this is really, I think, the last of it. This is the last of the sort of the Beatles footage that I think we're going to get to see. And it isn't the maudlin, sort of tale, the narrative that had been pushed for all of these years. And I was like, no, that stuff happened like a year or two later in like Alan Klein's office, where the camera's not rolling. It was really it was incredible to see all that stuff. But yeah, there is no other Beatles. I don't, I always like to keep an open mind, like, but like something must have happened. I don't know what it was. The combination of these four souls sonically and with their harmonies and their songwriting that just clicked in people's brains as like, we love this. We absolutely love this. And we're going to follow you throughout everything that you do. I don't know any other band that has happened with on such a global scale. Obviously there's the Rolling Stones and everything, but like, I don't know if people are pulling out Steel Wheels or Bridges to Babylon the way that they're still pulling out Let It Be or Revolver,
Yeah.
How many years were the Beatles a band? It was
7 years.
7 years. In that 7 years, they did really, really great work, and they stopped, and then they did subsequent solo work, which is all amazing and valid in its own right. But in that 7 year, what a phenomenon. It's sort of impossible to put into words. I don't know what hit the universe like that, or what could it ever happen again? I have no idea. I doubt it. I hope. That'd be cool. I'd like to see it.
I wonder what the next like Beatles phenomenon would even look like. Like, would they have the mop tops? Would they look different?
I don't know. I think it would have to be completely different, because it's like whenever it's sort of like Beatles derivative, it's too much,
Yeah.
It's very fascinating to me. Beatlemania was like a legitimate psychological condition. It should be studied. I don't know. Like, have they done brain science around the Beatles?
There should be. I should have a doctor on the podcast to describe that.
Yeah, I would be curious, because it is like, what is the confluence of these, four people together, and also George Martin and all just the right group of people, and the pace at which they did things. I get why they stopped,
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure they aged like twice as fast being in the Beatles.
Well, I saw, McCartney on this last tour. Is the first time I'd seen Paul McCartney, and he's 80 years old, and he did a 2.5-hour show for 75,000 people, and it was fantastic. It was unbelievable. Having a great time. He's got the best musicians in the world. It was like being in a church service.
Where did you see Paul perform?
At SoFi Stadium. My wife had never been to a big rock concert, and I've been to big rock concerts before, like maybe like Giant Stadium or something, but this was something else. This stadium has only been a stadium for like 2 years. They had the Super Bowl there, so it's called SoFi Stadium here in Los Angeles. Paul McCartney walked out, and he was like, wow, like, whoa, it wasn't part of the shtick that he does, on his tour. It was like, I think he was taken in by just the sheer amount of people. I think it was something like 75,000 people.
Wow.
And it being this absolutely state of the art, incredible venue. And I felt very, very privileged to be there.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I just saw him perform in Newark, New Jersey, and he brought out Bruce Springsteen, and I was blown away by that.
Yeah, so we saw, I think, probably the same show. You had the extra benefit of Bruce coming out. I think it did Glory Days, and that's great in Jersey, to
Yeah.
have Bruce come out. But it's also just like all of the artists. There is no Springsteen without the Beatles. Like, I have read or listened to every autobiography of every musician ever. It's what I fall asleep to every night. Thank you, Audible. But like, there's just a certain age of musician. It's just like, I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It's like, that's what I'm going to do. And it ranges from like Ozzy Osbourne to, Steve Lukather from Toto. It doesn't matter. And that's what I'm talking about, this like connectivity, which I think that Yoko is always sort of talking about. It's just like there is some sort of like spiritual connectivity with the Beatles music. And there were kids at the McCartney concert, and they knew the songs, and I was just it was really an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, we were really lucky to get a tour this year, especially because of the tribute to John made possible by Peter Jackson.
It was unbelievable from the minute that I think his DJ's name is Chris Holmes. It's unbelievable. That guy comes out and he starts doing like a 15-minute DJ set and a Beatles sort of songs.
Yes. Yeah.
Start to finish, it was just an incredible experience.
So, Jake, how did you first become interested in writing and broadcasting?
Yeah, I was a weird kid in the sense that I, from a very early age, always knew what I wanted to do. When I would watch something like Saturday Night Live, I didn't want to be on Saturday Night Live. I had an understanding from a very young age that there was a person named Lorne Michaels, and it was his job to pick who's on Saturday Night Live and what sketches get in. And he was kind of funny. I wanted to be a producer. I was also very inspired by John Waters' early films, and so much so that I wrote him a letter when I was 7 years old. And it was a very specific letter. I was asking him, there was a couple of his early first endeavor films that have never been released except in a museum setting. They were sitting up in his attic, and I wanted to see those movies. So I wrote him a letter saying I'd like to see those movies. And he called me.
Wow.
And I had a phone conversation with John Waters, and he wanted to know, did my parents know if I was watching his films? And I said, yes, they did. And once he knew that, he was just like, well, these films are sitting in my attic and they're not very good, but it's really nice to meet you. And whenever I've run into him as an adult, he always remembers this kid who, that he wrote him a letter about, hag in a black leather jacket, Roman candles, and eat your makeup. Something about seeing John Waters films, I was just like, well, this is a movie. This is just a guy who's making a movie on a very low budget with his friends, and it's hilarious and it's out there. And if this counts as a movie, that means I could do that too. Like, I could get my friends together and we could make something. And that really hit my brain from a very early age. And then I was just sort of on a pursuit to do that since I was a very small child.
So, how have the Beatles influenced your life?
I think the Beatles are a constant soundtrack in my life. I think what happens to me is, the Beatles are always there. And then I don't know if it is once every year or once every 18 months, but I'll get Beatles obsessed. And it could be about a specific area of their career, or it could be about a specific album, or it could be about a Beatles associate like Magic Alex. And I start to go down the rabbit hole. And so I think that they have absolutely been an influence. Music is such a huge influence in everything that I do. Like whenever I write a script or like I am the person who writes the song into the script and will fight with the network and hire the right music supervisor to make sure no, if it's in the script, we're going to get the song, and I will get on the phone and I will negotiate to get it at a lower rate, or I'll budget accordingly. I'll be like, we're going to pay the $50,000 for this song, whatever it is. It's like I'm that person. The needle drops in television that I've done or things that I've made are really, really important to me in an obsessive way. And then comedically, because of my age, I do distinctly remember as a child, telling my mom how much I loved the Beatles. And she said, they made movies too. And I said, what? This blew my mind as a kid. Because at that time, the Beatles movies had not come out on home video yet. And I remember that we were living in Philadelphia at the time, that the first Beatles movie that I saw was they were aired Yellow Submarine on television. And so I saw Yellow Submarine, and it was obviously great, but I also knew that it wasn't the Beatles doing their voices, and they pop up at the end and everything. But then they came out on video, and I think the first one that come out was Magical Mystery Tour. MPI Home Video put them all out. So Magical Mystery Tour came out, and I watched that, and I was just like, this is weird and great. But then I saw Help and A Hard Day's Night. I think they came out very close within each other. Seeing A Hard Day's Night for the first time, first of all, it's my favorite movie ever made about a sound check. It's the best movie about a band doing a sound check, I think, out there today. You can't find a better sound check movie. That was just mind-blowing to me. And then Help. I really appreciated the humor in Help. And then that led me down a path of discovering Richard Lester and the Goons, and then the Knack and How to Get It. Another thing that might be very controversial, but I am a big fan of, was I loved the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie with Peter Frampton and the Bee Gees that was made. Have you seen that? Have you seen the movie where Aerosmith and Peter Frampton get into a fight and Peter Frampton wins while singing Come Together? Have you seen the movie where a couple of robots sing She's Leaving Home? It's basically Cocaine, the motion picture. It is absolutely, it was produced by Robert Stigwood. It's got all of it's like, I guess its origins are in this great Broadway production they did of Sgt. Pepper. Like that was like basically like a proto Cirque du Soleil. It wasn't like a circus, but it was a big Broadway thing. They're going to do that at a movie. It's insane. At the end of it, everybody is singing the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band reprise. And I'm talking everybody from Bowser, from Sha Na Na to Phyllis Diller. The movie is absolutely insane. But again, I loved the Beatles when I was a little kid. And when I was a little kid, this movie was just like, I loved Saturday Night Fever. I loved Grease. I loved Xanadu. And it came out at that, it came out in 1978. The thing was absolutely not successful. Yeah. It was a critical and commercial flop, but there are people who hold a special place in their heart for it because it's just so insane. There's moments of it where you watch it and you're like, who asked for this? And then you see Robin Gibb do a pretty good cover of Oh Darling, and it's sort of like, hold on, this isn't funny. This is legitimately good. But Alice Cooper doing Because. I loved it when I was a kid. That was a huge influence to me. If John Waters is a bunch of people with no money getting together and making a film and committing to their art and their voice, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the movie from 1978, is people with way too much money. It's the tagline for the film is "A splendid time is guaranteed for all." Billy Preston is in the movie. It's like he brings everybody back to life at the end with a, George Burns sings "Fixing a Hole." It's really weird. It made a big impression on me, but I had already heard the Beatles music. Like, I knew that I was getting sort of these cover versions that were, and I was a big Bee Gees fan. I love Saturday Night Fever. So, like, well, it's the Bee Gees singing the Beatles. I like this. You do get, like, if you've ever heard Earth, Wind and Fire's amazing cover of "Got to Get You Into My Life," that comes from the Sergeant Pepper movie. Yeah, it's an endlessly fascinating film to me.
So do you think watching that movie is your favorite memory associated with the Beatles?
No, so I have so many memories associated with the Beatles. I remember being older and when the Beatles anthology happened, and that being such a huge deal, getting those Beatles anthology albums and hearing like the early mixes of or different alternative mixes of Strawberries. That was like the first time we were getting anything like that. And then watching it as it aired on ABC for 3 consecutive nights. It was because there was also a documentary that I watched over and over again when I was a kid called The Complete Beatles, which is a good sort of maybe an hour and 45-minute documentary on the Beatles, but it's essentially a truncated Beatles anthology that was made by somebody else. I also, as a kid, had a art book, and it was just like artwork of the Beatles, and I think I still have it. It's probably worth something, and I would look at that over and over again. The album covers themselves. In the 90s, so I'm a teenager when the Beatles anthology aired. Then they put all those albums out. They did this weird 90s run of vinyl mono Beatles vinyl remasters. I don't know if they're particularly good, but that was where I was like, I'm going to get these mono mixes and listen to them for the first time because this is how they were. And I remember also getting Abbey Road. It was like probably the one of the first CDs when we got a CD player. Abbey Road was one of the first CDs we had. And then when I was probably about 17 or 18 years old, I became friendly with Sean Lennon. We're still friendly to this day. Sean is my friend. We have not talked very much about the Beatles because our friendship is not based on who his dad was. It's based on the kind of scene that we were all hanging out in New York City in the 90s, which was sort of the Beastie Boys Grand Royal scene. And Adam Yauch, rest in peace, like Sean felt comfortable enough to give Adam Yauch like demos, and Yauch was like, "Hey, this is good. Let's put it out on Grand Royal and stuff." And I think that was a very vulnerable thing for Sean to do because Sean's just a couple of years older than me. Like, you're John Lennon's son. It's interesting. I lost my father this year, so I can relate. My father lived into old age and was not assassinated, but I know what it's like to lose a parent now. I don't know what it's like to lose a parent at a very young age, the way that Sean does. But our friendship was never based on who his dad was. It was based on just like the current music scene that was going on in New York City at the time, which was Chibo Mato, the Beastie Boys, and Grand Royal Records, which was the Beastie Boys label. And yeah, when I was a teenager, a lot of people know this, some people don't. I had a public access show that became an MTV show, and it was called Squirt TV. And we actually did shoot it out of my bedroom. And I booked Chibo Mato to be a guest, and Sean played bass in that band. So there's great footage on the internet of me as a teenager and Chibo Mato playing in my bedroom. And that we were just friends, you know what I mean? And there's some personal stuff that I would never talk about on a podcast where Sean, and he knows it, I was young and I was hanging out with a lot of adults. When I say adults, maybe people that are 10 years older than me. And Sean pulled me aside and he's just like, you're a kid. I'm a little bit older than you. And I know some stuff that's going on with you that's maybe not so good. And I'm going to talk to you about it. And I always remember that. And I love Sean for that on a very personal level. But yeah, never really talked to him about like, hey, what was it like for your dad to be a Beatle or anything like that? It's we had so much other stuff to talk about than, that, occasionally maybe he would say something, but like, I don't want to say cautious because there's nothing to hide, but I'm very protective because Sean is my friend and we're not nearly as close as we were back in the 90s, but we are still in touch and text back and forth occasionally. I was around for when he put out his first record, and I was on the radio at the time on K-Rock, and he came up to do an interview, and I remember being very protective then because the engineer is a big Beatles fan. In fact, this engineer was really cool. He remember him getting a CD of the great bootleg A Toot and a Snore in 74 and him playing that for me and be like, this is John and Paul and Stevie Wonder and Harry Nilsson and there's Coke being passed around and stuff like, and I just remember him just kind of watching the engineer and being like, hey man, like, I know this is the son of a Beatle, but like, he's like my friend and we're going to talk about his music and like, let's not get weird. And he was great. I guess I am protective of a friendship. I don't, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I recognize, yeah, your dad was in the Beatles. And I think when I look at, like, I've never met a Beatle, but I see Paul McCartney, whenever I see Paul McCartney, like interact with fans or something, I like, he's really good at being a Beatle.
Yes.
He's really good. Like, just like, he knows it's a big deal.
Definitely.
He's going to give you your moment and then he's going to go about his, like, he seems really good at it. I don't even know what I would say to Paul McCartney if I was to, meet Paul. I'd probably just want to talk about his day,
Yeah. I'm sure it gets, I'm sure it got really old fast for Sean, but he's such a nice guy. I'm sure he'll entertain it anyway.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But like, there's so many other things to talk about with Sean. Like, why make it about the Beatles?
I just remember Sean, like, I'm thinking about the stuff that we were listening to at the time, and it was just like the first time I heard Can, and forgetting, oh gosh, just a super cool Brazilian group from the 70s and stuff. It was just like, we were just all listening to all this like really cool music. I certainly remember Can. I remember us, like, Sean being like, you never seen Danger Diabolique, the movie? And like, just the stuff. We were in our early 20s and stuff. And it's just that kind of stuff that whatever it was in the 90s that we were interested in. And yeah, his dad would come up, and I think one funny thing, I think I did tell Sean this one time because it was funny. Like, one time he called, and this was back in the days of caller ID, and the caller ID showed up Ono Yoko, Ono, Yoko, and I was just like, that's funny, And
Right.
but Yoko was just like, yeah, it's Sean's mom. She's Yoko Ono. She's super cool. Occasionally, like, a story would come up, but like nothing that's like popping into mind. There was no like, oh yes, well, when my dad was in the Lost Weekend period, like, there was nothing that deep, like just like the way anybody would talk about their dad. That was such a interesting time in New York City and stuff. But then, yes, Beatles anthology stuff that happened earlier. That was 1995, 1996, those records came out and the TV specials and stuff. And then, yeah, meeting the Beastie Boys and stuff happened in I guess later in 1995, December of 1995. And there was just one Alec Baldwin, whatever date Alec Baldwin and SNL, the Beastie Boys were on SNL, whatever date that is, there was that's where my life got different that night.
Right.
Inspirationally, though, they've, the humor of the Beatles, particularly in A Hard Day's Night, very dry wit. Like each Beatle has their own sort of sense of humor, and then their shared collective sense of humor. It definitely influenced all the weird, dumb sketch comedy that we were doing at the Upright Citizens Brigade in the late 90s, early 2000s. But then so did the Ramones, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have literally the Ramones take their band name from Paul McCartney's alias that he used to use checking into hotels. He would check in as Paul Ramon. So there's no, Ramones without Beatles. So it's all, I think, at the end of the day, I like a good pop song is a good pop song is a good pop song, whether it's the Beatles or the Ramones. And I feel the same way about comedy, like particularly sketch comedy. Like a good sketch is a good sketch is a good sketch. I don't care if it comes from the Kids in the Hall or the State or Mr. Show or later Tim and Eric or of course Upright Citizens Brigade or The Lonely Island. A good sketch is a good sketch is a good sketch. It either works or it doesn't,
Yeah.
And the Beatles just had the massive hit ratio of like, yeah, most of their stuff worked. Like, how many Beatles songs are there?
There's like 236 or something like that.
Yeah. And like, I would say probably like 200 of them are great,
Yeah.
Maybe there's a couple of clunkers, and even the clunkers, you go back and you go, it's that it belongs there.
Yeah, totally. And even the Beastie Boys loved sampling the Beatles too.
Oh my God, Paul's Boutique, like, the sampling laws changed, but to make Paul's Boutique today would be impossible. Like it's grandfathered in, and I think there's a relationship with Capitol, but like that album is made up entirely of samples. And another movie that I loved when I was young was Car Wash, which was also directed by the same director as the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie. And Paul's Boutique is littered with samples from the Car Wash soundtrack and the Beatles and a million other things,
Yeah.
But particularly the way they sample the end is it's unbelievable. It's, you can go down the Beastie Boys Paul's Boutique rabbit hole as well. Like I remember when Spotify was first a thing, somebody made like, here is a playlist of all of the samples of that are on Spotify of songs from Paul's Boutique that are sampled,
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I remember feeling pretty cool, like listening to Paul's Boutique and being like, I know where that sample's from,
Yeah.
But, you'd have to be a complete musicologist, which now I could probably tell you what most of the samples are Paul's Boutique because of the I'm 43, I've had some time, but at the time of its release, no. But the Beastie Boys also it got left off of, it's interesting because it got left off of License Sale because it sampled the Beatles. They did a song called I'm Down. They did a cover basically of the Beatles' I'm Down.
My girl likes Frank's, not pork and beans. I'm gonna wax that girl right out there, jeans. I'm down. I'll give you love, cause you know I'm down. I'll give you love, because I'm fully D, because I keep a loaded pistol inside my pants.
But they had to leave that off of License Sale, or maybe it was, I think, I don't know if it was a creative decision or a business decision, but there was always a sort of a synergy between, even though the Beastie Boys are a totally different band influenced by so many different influences, like for hip hop, I think that they were maybe as close as you could get to, there's other people who have done way innovative things in hip hop since, but, and it might be just my personal bias, but like And they would still be going, I think, too. I think they would still be going had Yauch not passed. I don't know how you could continue the Beasties without Adam Yauch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely my teenage years, and then yeah, these days I am a sucker for. I'm not a sucker for because they're great. What Giles Martin does, any reissue that comes out, yeah, I want to hear Giles Martin's cool new mix of Sgt. Pepper, the White Album, or Abbey Road. I love these new mixes. Just the other day, I was checking out, they did McCartney 1, 2, 3 in Dolby Atmos. And I popped in my AirPods and I was just like, let me hear what Temporary Secretary sounds like in Dolby Atmos. Like, it's fun,
Yeah, that sounds like a blast.
And I love the new mixes. Like, I love it. It's not like, they don't feel like cash-ins. I think the Beatles, like, yes, of course you can buy like a lunchbox. It's a whole business. Beatles memorabilia. It's a whole business. But like the stuff that they've been doing, like, God, I wish I bought that mono box set, like, stupid. Why didn't I buy that?
Right.
They did a really great job. I'm glad I picked up the couple reissues that I have. That I don't know why it shouldn't be this way, but it costs like, you want a mono revolver, nice pressing of a mono revolver, from these remasters, they're $100 now. And I'm like, that's a little pricey.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was smart to, like, and then, yeah, I don't know why, like my Beatles White Album from youth is a MoFi. I still have it. And now that's the current obsession. It's just like, should I invest some money in like buying like the best Beatles vinyl pressings that I can? They don't need to be first pressings, just like the best. Like,
yeah,
I hear
of course.
Dutch pressing of this is, like, but I don't have a stereo system that costs like a car. So it's sort of like, I don't know if I need to do that.
It makes me wonder, do you think that the Beatles mono recordings will ever become available on streaming?
I wonder, I don't know why they don't. It's interesting. I'm of a certain age where the Beatles catalog, I didn't get the US albums. I'm born in 79. The Beatles albums that I heard growing up are the uniformed UK, what we now consider to be the official Beatles catalog.
Yes.
So I do have a copy of Yesterday and Today, but I bought it. It was cheap. It was like $15. I bought it to do a bit on Instagram. I wrote my name on it, and I was like, this is a Beatles Butcher cover, and I wanted to make sure that it was safe and didn't get lost. So I wrote my name on it. Make people crazy. It's like the most expensive record in the world, But yeah, no, I don't know why the mono stuff is not on streaming. Audio files are crazy. Like, everybody's got their own opinion on stuff. Like Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs just got in trouble because like you're never going to believe this, but we used modern technology to make these records sound better. It's not yes, it's analog, but we put it into a computer, which, by the way, the human ear can't hear, certain frequencies. We put it into a computer, then we put it back through an analog pass. Sorry, I guess it made these audio files insane. I'm a little bit of an audiophile. Like, I like a clean sounding pressing of something, but I buy records to play them. I did buy the Abbey Road box set, because I wanted to hear all the outtakes and mixes and stuff. And I was just like, that's the only Beatles stereo album.
Yeah.
Let me hear it. Obviously it's a subject. The Beatles is a subject. I feel like I'm talking all over the place. I am not eloquent in my discussion of this band right now.
No, but these are all such important topics, and we're covering a lot of ground here. Here's a question. Which Beatles album are you looking forward to seeing being remixed in the future?
Revolver. I'd love to hear what Giles Martin would do with Revolver. Basically, the way I look at it is like the mono Beatles albums, which is most of the catalog, never really got proper stereo mixes. The stereo mixes were always sort of an afterthought. Same is true for Brian Wilson, and that was Phil Spector back to mono, and it was meant to come out of one speaker. They were being played for AM radio. So the ability, if the technology allows them to go in, take the original master tapes, do this. What Giles Martin does is so amazing because it is just so subtle. It's just so subtle. It's just like, let's just bring up Ringo's snare drum a little bit. Let's push these vocals a little bit forward. I'm talking about on these new vinyl remasters, and the same, I think, for streaming. It's just like, let's use the tools that we have today. Let's not mess with the integrity of the record. Let's not change it so it sounds totally different, but let's like push the boundaries of technology to just bring out the sound of what's there a little bit more, of like what's on the tape, Yeah. And I would love Revolver. I would love Revolver because at that point, that's when the Beatles become the studio band. The touring. I also would love Rubber Soul. Please Please Me with the Beatles, those sort of earlier albums, like there's only so much you can do. It's, couple, it's 2-track, there's not even 4-track recording yet. But as Beatles started getting into like using the studio, I'm all for Giles Martin going in and using whatever magic he has, because he has the ear for it. He's only been listening to these records since he was born. His dad only produced all of them. And then he has certainly proven his chops. There's a golden ear there. It's inherited, and again, spiritually connected. I was amazed also with what Peter Jackson did technologically. Forget the visual restoration. Yes, he made the Get Back footage from Twickenham Studios. The colors really pop. But what he did with the audio, being able to isolate, the Beatles knew that they were being recorded. And he was able to, so they would be strumming, and having a private conversation. Well, they didn't know that all these years later, Peter Jackson would be able to go and isolate that audio and like eavesdrop on these conversations that they thought they were, hiding from the Niagara recordings. It's so cool. It's so cool. I've heard there's an 8-hour cut of the Beatles Get Back. Yes, they put out a Blu-ray, and I bought it just in case. No, it doesn't come with a re-edited, remastered Let It Be, the Michael Lindsay Hogg version. It's just what was on Disney Plus. And I bought it just because I believe in physical media and I just don't trust Disney Plus. It's just like, okay, yeah, you have the rights to Get Back for 5 years. And then we're going to take it back because we're the Beatles and we're going to put it somewhere else, or we're going to take it away. So I always want to be able to have access, because I don't know what's going to happen in that 12-month, 18-month cycle in my brain where I'm going to have to go and do my Beatles obsessive thing.
Right.
That is setting off something in me that gets me to my next creative work,
Yes.
So I just, even though there's no extras, I bought it because if I own it, I have it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, the original Let It Be and Magical Mystery Tour
disappeared.
Yeah, just
forever.
Wiped off the face of the earth.
Let It Be, I remember renting the terrible grainy, it was at Magnetic Home Video Corporation put that out, and the Beatles at Shea Stadium. I remember renting those from Kim's Video with my dad, and it's very grainy, bad transfer, but it was the only thing you could have for a long, long time for Let It Be. And then they did remaster it, and then they were like, we're not ready to put this out. And I think a bootleg sort of circulated a better version of Let It Be, and I'm not above buying a Beatles bootleg. If the right one comes, I have a Beatles bootleg album that I bought just for the cover, and it's in a music video I directed for my friend John Daly, which is a it's called Cheer Me Up. It's a shot for shot remake of the Rolling Stones music video for Start Me Up. Only it's on John Daly's album Ding Dong Delicious, Cheer Me Up. And if you watch that music video, you can see a very unique Beatles bootleg album in that video. I'll tell people, go look up John Daly, Daly, Cheer Me Up, and you can see the Beatles bootleg that I have that I bought just for the cover.
Do you remember the name of the bootleg by any chance?
It's called Fuck. It looks like the cover of Help, but it just says the Beatles, Fuck. And it's really funny. And I was just like, I don't even know what's on it. It's just a crappy album, like, but it's just the funniest cover. Also, a huge, huge influence to me comedically is the Ruddles. Eric Idle and Neil Innes and everything they did, Rutland Weekend Television, like the Ruddles, it is pitch perfect parody. You have the funniest people in the world at that time. People from Monty Python, people from Saturday Night Live doing a fake Beatles. Like the Ruddles album is hilarious. Just the musicality that they were able to parody is so spot on, and it's just filled with jokes. I love the Ruddles. When you can parody something in music and you can get it spot on, that is something that particularly gets me. And Ruddles is gold standard. And then also anything Tom Sharpling and John Wurster do, gold standard. Jimmy Fallon does a lot of stuff too. One of the early things he did on the late night show is just like the Doors singing Reading Rainbow. But the attention to detail on that, like we're going to get the right Vox Continental organ, with the inverted black and white keys. Like we're going to rent that so we can do this dumb bit. Like,
yeah. And one thing about the Ruddles is like, that's like one of the only parodies that doesn't disparage the original band. Like you can love the Ruddles and the Beatles at the same time.
Oh, because it was done with love, and I think that first of all, Eric Idle and George Harrison are good friends. George Harrison did one of the greatest things that a person can do with their money. Life of Brian would not exist if it wasn't for George Harrison, who produced the movie because he wanted to see it.
Right. Yeah.
A very expensive movie ticket, which then got George Harrison into film production, and he gave us some great films. Like the original SNL was often referred to as the Beatles of comedy, and that's why it's like no surprise that like I know for a fact that one thing I guess I did talk about with Sean about. It is true. They, Paul and John were watching SNL. They did almost go down there for what I think is still one of the funniest bits ever, when Lorne Michaels got on the air as executive producer of Saturday Night Live and offered the Beatles $3,000 to reunite on the show. It is, I don't care how, if you want to give Ringo less, that's up to you. It's such a funny bit that then, and they rarely did callbacks on SNL, but then George Harrison comes, I think, when Eric Idle hosts, and he's like, and there's this footage of, this little sketch of Lauren explaining to George that like, no, he doesn't get the full $3,000. It would have to be all the Beatles. But that's one thing I do remember. Like, did your dad really almost go down to SNL? And it's like, yeah, they did. How that would have changed the history of the Beatles or Saturday Night Live. Like, I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they were like, lads, because that would have been amazing. I guess I never really thought, talking to you, I've never really thought about this. Like, I've been able to run around. I was very lucky in getting to sort of like run around every inch of Studio 8H and Saturday Night Live when I was a teen. Not a teen. I was in my 20s. Like, I had a TV show when I was a teenager, but like, I got a joke on Weekend Update. The first joke when Jimmy Fallon and Tina Fey were doing Weekend Update, and Jimmy asked me, hey, would you write some jokes for Weekend Update? I was just like, okay, this is a thing. They don't do it anymore. But it was just like, if they used your joke, you got $100.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm in my early 20s, and this was like the most important thing anybody ever. I remember being told like, oh, you can submit as many jokes as you want. And, they write like 1,000 jokes each week to get to the 15 jokes on Weekend Update. I remember getting one on for the first time, and it was a mean joke about Paris Hilton. Tina Fey did it, and I don't even think I cashed the check. I hope I still have it, but it was like, here's your $100 for your joke,
Awesome.
It was, and then also another friend of mine was Harper Simon. Harper Simon is Paul Simon's son. And we were all young and crazy and being goofballs in New York City. And he had a great apartment across the street from CBGB's that he lived in. And, he had a situation where, he was Paul Simon's kid. If he wanted to go up to SNL, he just showed up. Just like, Paul's son's downstairs. Okay. So I think, I don't know if anybody would do that today, but it was crazy. It was also very innocent too. Like, it was a very innocent time, but I think it goes back to my parents. Like, they always gave me access. It's not every parent that lets their child watch a John Waters movie. I'm not talking about Hairspray. I'm talking about, Pink Flamingos and Female Trouble, Multiple Maniacs. But they, my mom, I do remember my mom telling me there are Beatles movies and getting those for me. And, indulging this idea that, like, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to have a career. It's going to work out. This is important in school. This isn't important in school. Like, as someone who's going to be a father soon, not tomorrow, but God willing, very soon, I am very sort of like thoughtful. Like, I want to be very thoughtful about what I know I can play the Beatles for a kid, because if you play it for a kid, you're going to have to hear it over and over and over again. That's how kids work.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe that's part of it. The reason why the kids like the Beatles so much is because if a parent plays it, the parent's not going to be upset hearing the Beatles over and over again. Most parents are still like, throwing on the, like, and then you can get sick. You could probably get sick of the Beatles. I think you get sick of the Beatles. You're like, all right, it's enough. Let's go listen to some Duran Duran. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's listen to something else. This is made in this century. But I said, let's listen to something made in this century. And then I brought up Duran Duran. No, like earlier today, I was just like, all right, I get it. This band Wet Leg, it has been aggressively promoted to me. I've heard the song. Let me see. And I listened. I was like, all right, yeah, I get it. It's good. It's good. Yeah, it's good for right now. I see why it's popping organically. I was like, this isn't like. I looked up, like, they're just on Domino. They're not. This is not a big, huge band. It's just it's being targeted to me aggressively. It's just like, you're an indie rock guy. You bought Merge Records releases. You've directed videos for bands on Merge Records. Like, you should, the algorithm knows you should look at this. And the Beatles is also, I think, a break from the algorithm too. It's like, you can always just kind of go back, and I don't know. I probably don't find myself putting on, and maybe this is just me, I don't find myself putting on like Beatles for sale start to finish very often. I like I'm a Loser, and every once in a while you just got to sit down and listen to the White Album or Sgt. Pepper. It's just it's part of the creative process, or solo stuff. Like, All Things Must Pass, the George Harrison record is just like, boy, they really should have, like George had some songs. Maybe they should have let,
I know. Yeah.
And let it be. It's like, it's like, I have some songs. I know I have some, you had a double album's worth, the extra one, and then the extra goofy one, but like, It's pretty. I bought that remaster. I was just like, let me hear that.
Yeah, that was a great remaster too. I enjoyed that one. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll take breaks from the Beatles music. Not because like I don't enjoy it or I want to stop listening to it, but I think like in my mind kind of registers the Beatles as a family, and then sometimes you just need a break from
Your family, yes,
exactly.
exactly. I totally understand what you're talking about. It's not that oh, I'm sick of listening to the Beatles. It's like I love the Beatles. Like I love my family.
Yeah.
Um, and your family sometimes everybody needs a little alone time.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah, and then I go listen to other music, whether it's like John Mayer, Dire Straits, Grateful Dead, but I don't think I'd be able to survive a binge of any of those other artists for as long as I binge listen to the Beatles.
Certainly
I
not the
can,
Grateful Dead. You don't have time.
yeah.
If you started binging every
Right.
Dead tape, it's interesting. I saw the Dead. My dad took me to a Dead show when I was a kid, and I was just like, I get it, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you know. But I will watch a 6-hour Amazon documentary on the Grateful Dead. And I was just like, it's not a band I particularly enjoy. I understand other people do. It's not a band I particularly enjoy. And I watched the documentary and I was just like, yep, this band's not for me. And also, I think they're bad people. Like some of them are legitimately bad people. not to, I know people that love the Dead and stuff. And I had this experience. There's some friends that love fish, and like I remember walking into a fish show. It was the garden, and it's like I was there for 15 minutes, took a look around. I was like, I get it, not for me. You know what I mean? I just me, just me. It's not, it's just my opinion. But again, like I don't find that there's like a lot, like I don't meet a lot of people who are like, man, the Beatles suck. Like I don't believe them. It's a contrarian facade. It's to be controversial. It's to like really like stake your claim of independence. It's like, no, there's something that happened in the 60s for 7 years creatively amongst, you know, four people. And I will also, throw in their associates and stuff like people like Brian Epstein and Derek Taylor and Mal Evans, like all of these, and not everybody was, a good force in the Beatles universe. I'm obsessed with Magic Alex. Like,
Yeah.
I think if I could talk to the Beatles about anything, it would be, how did you get involved with this Magic Alex fella? This fella is a lunatic, and I'm obsessed.
The, the nickname is so 1967.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's too many resources available for learning about him.
He's sort of like, and I can't remember if he's passed or not, but he's sort of a shady character who sort of made it like he was very litigious,
Yeah.
but he was there for some pivotal stuff. I mean, he was there when they went to India. He did try to build them that recording studio, which, by the way, he wasn't wrong about the future of recording studios. He just didn't have the technical knowledge. Also, technology did not exist at the time to have 18 speakers. Now you could, have 18 individual speakers, but they could barely get a 4-track working. They had to go back to, I think EMI at some point. They had to push them to buy an 8-track to do Abbey Road. Like, and I think also too, like, and this might be generational, but I think everybody at some point, gets a Porta Studio 424 4-track and starts going to themselves, well, look, this Beatles made Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with 4 tracks, and they kept bouncing down to, you know what I mean? So and again, very 90s, but like, I loved Ween, and Ween made their first records on 4-track and stuff, and They Might Be Giants also. They made their, so I had the 4-track obsession too when I was a kid. Now everybody's phone is a recording studio.
That's right.
It's really amazing. You don't need to go to Electric Ladyland. You can, and it's
Yeah.
nice to if you can afford it, but you don't need to. You can, do some stuff in your house. Just the fact that this is the Jetsons right now. What we're doing, we're talking over a video phone with 2 pretty decent mics, and then you can put this out to people immediately. Like, I found it really interesting. Like, I bought Lizzo's record because I heard the single About Damn Time. I was like, I bet this is gonna be a good record, and it is a good record. And she had to change a lyric because she'd used the word spaz, which she did not know the origin of that word, and it's sort of a word that's been retired. So she's changed the lyric, and if you listen to it on Spotify, it has the changed lyric. But yeah, they pressed those records before she changed the lyric. So the copy that I have on vinyl, it has the unchanged lyric, because it's a lot easier to swap out a song on Spotify than it is to, press up records.
Right. Yeah. I bet that's going to be worth some money one day.
I don't know. It's so weird what becomes worth money. Like, I think it's weird that these Beatles records that came out in 2014 are like $100 a pop now.
Yeah.
I think that's super weird. I think it's just a supply and demand issue, and greater business minds are at work than you or I to determine like the Beatles pressings on mono, or putting the mono mixes on Spotify. Obviously, I think they're focused. I don't know what the next project is. Like, it sort of was like they were going in this order. They hit Let It Be. Let It Be is the last. I remember also in the 2000s when McCartney took Let It Be back from Phil Spector and did the Let It Be Naked, which is great. Not, all of that stuff I loved, which I guess was Giles Martin's sort of like first project, was the Love mashup Cirque du Soleil soundtrack. That was
Love that one too.
cool. That was really cool. And there's just, I don't know what the next project is. My hope is that they do go back to the later 60, the earlier 60s recordings. And because what can they do? They can't remaster A Hard Day's Night again. That's out. It looks great. I've seen it both in the theater. I've seen it on home video. It's not going to get better looking. Help is done. Magical Mystery Tour is done. Love Paul's commentary on that. The fact that aired on the BBC in black and white on Christmas, like, that was the first sort of like time the Beatles, like, people were like, we don't know what this is.
Yeah.
We don't know if this is good. Well, yeah, it's being shown on black and white television on the BBC. Like, this is,
Yeah.
It's a weird, they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what they were making. It's a weird art project.
But stuff like that is why I think that the Beatles are just my absolute favorite, because they're able to make this kind of movie they're making it up as they go along. John has that scene of him putting spaghetti on a plate with a shovel.
Didn't he dream it up the night before or something?
It doesn't make sense. But they do it, and it's almost like you're just hanging out with your friends. It's not like, at least for me, it's not like
I'm a bus full of freaks and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea in theory, and it's interesting because, like, Paul does these things. Like, Give My Regards to Broad Street. Like, I remember when that came out, and I was just like, what is this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we could talk. This is why you have this show.
Yeah.
And, I, as a listener, and I don't know what anybody's getting out of hearing me talk about the Beatles, But as a listener and a fan of Twin Peaks, to hear Mark Frost, talk about, first of all, he's met Beatles, and he's older. You got to sort of experience it firsthand and everything, and then the phenomenon of Twin Peaks. That conversation to me was utterly fascinating because I would want to have a conversation with Mark Frost about the Beatles. So you've got something real special here, in that there's a lot of these Beatles podcasts, and it is like my friend Will Hines has one. He doesn't do it anymore, but it's, screw it, we're just going to talk about the Beatles, and it's just guys talking about the Beatles. Whereas I think your approach is you're specifically talking to creatives, and I don't know what kind of creative I am. I didn't create Twin Peaks, but I guess I am some sort of pop culture historian authority who writes comedy and is a broadcaster. I don't even, at this point, many years into my career, I don't even know what I do. I know what I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, I know what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. That doesn't sound fun right now. No, thank you.
Yeah.
As opposed to, this sounds like fun. I would like to do that.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, how, the Beatles, sort of like how the Beatles tried to operate as best as they could. They were on a sort of album cycle. They did start to, slow it down a bit, getting off the road was smart. I can't imagine it being artistically gratifying for them. Because when I think about concerts, like now we have the power to amplify a stadium. Like, I saw Paul McCartney. It sounded amazing. But what the hell did they have when the Beatles played Shea Stadium on a stage, and you know what I mean? Like, you couldn't hear anything.
Right.
The acoustics were terrible. So it's just like, it's a spectacle. I'm sure it's fun to have, all those people scream. You couldn't hear anything. They couldn't hear themselves. And then it's a car to a hotel room, to a car to a hotel room. And then it's just like, and then into the studio for songwriting. Like, I would quit the road too if I were a Beatle, which I am certainly not. But I think that's when artistically, and not to say the earlier stuff isn't great, because I Won't Hold Your Hand is pretty damn good song. It's about as good of a pop song as it gets. It's like, they really knew verse, chorus, verse structure. They built it. But when they started to like break it, and it's like, Magical Mystery Tour is a weird, I guess, I guess they've made the album, the US album, but that as an EP is weird. But like, Flying, what is that, man?
Yeah.
Like, what is that song?
Yeah. And that's the cut version too.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and then I just like all of the solo stuff. Like I'm sorry. Like, Wings is great. Like, they have some great songs.
Yeah.
John Lennon's solo stuff that sort of went unappreciated, like, Sometime in New York City, like, and I'm the lunatic who's like heard, both versions, the Zappa version, the one that has, the Mark Volman and the Turtles, those guys mixed out, as opposed to, Scumbag, like that stuff's, fun, where it's just like, hey, do you want to come jam with the Mothers of Invention? And it ends up on Sometime in New York City, and Zappa's mad, and that's because he mixed that, all that stuff. I love, like, Mind Games. Like,
oh, I love Mind Games.
Forget it. It's like John's solo stuff, and then Ringo, like Goodnight Vienna, like Harry Nilsson also, who I absolutely love and I think is underappreciated. Like, is there anything cooler than like the Beatles saying, like, our favorite group right now is Nilsson?
Yeah.
Eric Taylor hearing 1941 on the radio and like, I got to send this to the boys. And then Harry Nilsson getting a phone call from, from Paul, and then getting a phone call from John, and then, waiting for a phone call from George. Like, this came Monday. Where's George calling me? It's like, and then Nilsson working with the Beatles and covering the Beatles, like, and then bringing Dylan, forget it.
Yeah.
They were just sort of like constantly open to, new ideas. Even when you get to like the B-52s, when, I guess there's a very famous story of John Lennon hearing Rock Lobster, and it's just like saying to Yoko, like, they're doing what you're doing. They get it. And I get really, really mad at anybody who, and I think it lays it to rest when we've seen in this Get Back footage, like Yoko did not break up the Beatles. That is such a misogynistic, reductive, stupid, dumb thing to say. You want to know what broke up the Beatles? Read that book, You Never Give Me Your Money. That's what broke up the Beatles. It's just like, it was time for them to break up. And then, it took them another decade to untangle the finances of it all. And that's very difficult. And, but, I'm very glad that it seems like Paul and John did get some closure on the friendship. Even if all the sort of business stuff wasn't taken care of, they got some closure on the friendship, even though they kind of never did music together again. They got some closure on the friendship, I think. And yeah, I get very, very angry at people who don't recognize sort of Yoko's contributions to the Beatles. Like, John just fell stupidly in love.
Yeah.
So did Paul. And look, also, like, we hold them up on a pedestal. They also were a bunch of, young dudes in Germany at one time wearing leather and taking a bunch of speed. Nobody was a perfect angel. I love the video of Ringo Starr, peace and love, after the, no more autographs. It's just,
Yeah.
and I get it, man. Like, if you're Ringo Starr, it's just like, I'm not signing anything anymore. I'm sick of it. Paul's really good at it,
Yeah.
but Ringo's like, I'm enough. I'll play with my all-star band and leave me alone, And I do the thing. I admit, when it's his birthday, I do, at 12 noon, wherever you are, I say peace and love, peace and love. You got to do it. You got to do it. It's all Ringo's asking. He's not asking for anything more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It was time for them to break up. I mean, it's not like today where bands can exist for 20 years and only release like 3 albums.
Yeah.
They were together for 7 years and released 13 albums.
Yeah, because it was the custom of the day. First of all, they released albums at a time where they had to push for that, where you had to fight back and say, we're going to make an album. It's not about just these singles. They didn't want to rip off their audience by, that's why you have sort of now, I guess, your past masters or mono masters, whatever. Like, those are singles. Like, I Want to Hold Your Hand is not on any Beatles album because it came out as a single, and they were not going to charge the public for a single that they had already bought by putting it on an album, which became the custom in the, like, how many records have you bought for that one song? That's where the music industry got so greedy, until Napster came along and just like, and it still hasn't recovered, but it was just like, I like this one song and the rest of it's just filler. The Beatles, like, in addition to the great singles that they put out, they were a band that started thinking of, this is an album, which then puts Brian Wilson in the mindset of, okay, I'm going to make an album. and then we get Pet Sounds, and then we had to wait, but we eventually got Smile. We eventually got it, and the countless other people who have made, like, there's no, whatever you think of as politics or whatever, or music, but The Wall. Roger Waters is another guy who's just like, oh, my dad died in World War II. The Beatles, it's like Elton John, like all of these people who started to just think about not just the singles, but the album. The Beatles led that. They were the argument for that because they made these albums that really were cohesive pieces that you were meant to listen to, A side and B side. And now today in our culture, I don't think we're there. I think very few artists, like Kanye West will put out an album. Beyonce will put out an album. It's we don't have a lot of sort of like big artists. It's like, it's all about the song. It's
Right.
The single, the TikTok, whatever it is.
Yeah, now it's about TikTok.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's good or if it's bad. It's just what it is. It's just different. It's just where we are now. I do think there are some artists that have benefited from just having it being a single based economy. Like when Apple made the 99-cent single and now we're streaming, I said, this is interesting. We're going sort of backwards to sort of the 50s and the 60s and it being about the great single. And it'll be interesting to see who does what and who will be able to do an album. And nobody's going to measure up to the Beatles, nor should they try, because they were just four guys doing their thing, being influenced by all the things that were around them. And I think that, like, the Beatles are going to be an influence because they're just everybody. It's like the sun, it's like, it's the sun and the moon. Like you're making music either during the daytime or nighttime. There's no way you haven't heard the Beatles unless you're you've lived some weird life where you were part of a science experiment where you're totally isolated from hearing the Beatles or anything related to the Beatles, any of their solo, like it's going to have seeped in somehow. But 13 albums, 7 years. And then, even McCartney, when McCartney puts out a new album now, you will hear one or two songs on it that are like, Paul wrote a good song.
Yeah.
Like, or I was particularly fascinated by, I forget which song it is, but the singer Dominic Fike. I was just like, oh, I like his
Kiss of Venus.
His version of the Kiss of Venus. I was just like, yeah, Paul's is good. I kind of like Dominic's version better. Sorry, Paul. But he did that for a reason, and that's why I think Elton John is someone who's super smart and has had a hit in every decade because he's, Paul is voraciously a consumer of new music. So is Elton John, and they like what they like. They don't like what they don't like, and they take, and it's like, McCartney 3 came as no surprise to me, like out of the pandemic, because I was just like, well, Paul's had a home studio since when? 1970? He's got a phone. He can hum into the phone. And McCartney 2 is just a blast of an album. And McCartney's great. So now they have that, at the time when we're recording this, I don't know when somebody's listening to it, there could be a McCartney 4. These podcasts don't go away, I've found. But like there's 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 revisited. And I don't think there's anybody who is 80 years old and living in the ultimate playground of life than Paul McCartney. Like pick up the phone and call anybody. Live like that guy does. He has his private time. He has his family, and then he goes out and does his stuff, whatever Paul, I think, you've got that much. it's not even about money. It's just sort of like, yes, I was a Beatle. I honor the fact that I was a Beatle. I know you've paid a lot of money and you want to hear these songs, and I like to make money, and I probably have a staff and things, but I also am going to just like he just lives, man. He just keeps on living, and he doesn't really push his politics on anybody,
Yeah.
it's he seems to be having the time of his life at
Yeah.
at 80 years old. And I don't know if it always was that way, but I'm like, I think the point of this life thing and this creativity thing is to, and yes, Paul has all the resources in the world, but you can get to a mindset, even if you don't have those resources, of just like, I don't know what today's adventure is going to bring. What's on the agenda that I have to do? Okay, well, I got to do that, and then I'm just going to go, and I'm just going to follow my heart, and every once in a while, something good will come out of it, because I got a track record of being pretty good at doing this stuff called music for Paul McCartney, or art, or whatever it is. Ringo paints, and Ringo makes music. It's just, if you can live like a Beatle in your mind, not saying have an ego, they actually seem pretty egoless. I think it's just sort of like, well, I've already went through the most insane stuff ever, which is having Beatlemania. Like, think about that as a phrase. Like, is it in the actual DSM? Like, what happened? I survived through that. We made all of these great songs. I did it with my friends. I got angry with my friends. We all kind of worked it out. My friends are gone. Some, both very tragically, they're still there in spirit. The spirit is still with us, and the music is still with us. They may not be here physically, and that can be, this is absolutely probably tragic some days for people, but like, yeah, live like Paul McCartney, man. Like, what's that guy doing every day? I'm sure he's got a list. I'm sure he's got stuff to do. I'm sure he's got to buy groceries, or at least have somebody get the groceries for him, but then go do something creative and not be like held up about like experimenting or whatever,
Yeah.
Like, did the fireman, what the hell was that? You want to do electronic stuff? Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Is it tarnished the legacy of the beat? No. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
Dave Bowie. It's like he played in Tin Machine for a while. And some people like Tin Machine. Some people don't like Tin Machine. Does that screw up Ziggy Stardust for anybody? No.
Yeah, that's a great idea, to live like a Beatle, because I think even when they were Beatles, they lived like that too. Like,
Yeah.
I think they never intentionally set out to break down boundaries, but they did, just because they were like, this is what we're doing, and because we want to do it. And I think that's just a great way to live, and that's the most effective way.
Oh yeah, no, like you can't plan for something like the Beatles. You just can't plan for it. You can just choose how you're going to react to it, and
Right.
yeah, they made some reactions that that sometimes were probably healthy, and sometimes that were less healthy. But I think you have to do that in life. Like, you got to make some mistakes along the way and not be afraid to make some mistakes. I'm not saying that somebody should go out and follow a false prophet, but at the same time, I don't think that they didn't get anything out of transcendental meditation,
Right.
or Alan Klein, not a great person, documented, not a great person.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the right business person for 3 out of the, like Paul was, right to be like, I don't want this guy, handling my finances and handling the band, and but then later on, he, says to Michael Jackson, like, where there's money is music publishing. That was him being a friend, and that, ended up not working out so great. But I think at this point, if Paul wanted to buy his catalog back, he probably could, because we're seeing all these artists now that are selling their catalog. They're older.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like Fleetwood Mac, like, yeah, fine. I've got so many years on the planet. I'll take the, $250 million now. You can figure out the rest of it, later. It's, the clock is running now. If you have that,
Right.
sell, but in 1985, after doing Say with Michael Jackson, it's so funny now because you think about I don't know how old you are, but it's like in 1987, it was sacrilege when Revolution was used in a Nike commercial.
I heard about that. I'm only 25, but I've definitely heard
You're
about
25. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're much younger than I am. And 25 is great, and enjoy being 25. It's the best. It's also the worst. 27 will be terrible, but you'll get through it. It's just part of life. You know what I mean? And that's what I think about, like the Beatles. They were so young. Like, how old were they when they were doing all of this?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really start to understand how to be a grown up until maybe 32, 33. And
I think George was my age in Let It Be.
Yeah. So that's nuts.
Yeah.
So that is nuts. And it's just yeah. No wonder it's so they're in their 40s and the 80s. It's like by the time you get to 80, as as Paul is, you're probably like, what do I give a fuck? You know what I mean? What do I got to prove? But I still, it's really just, you saw him. Did he seem like he didn't want to be up there?
Oh, he loved every second.
Didn't he? And I don't think you can fake that. I've been to shows where I was like, oh, they're doing this for the money. I've seen those shows. The energy is very, very different.
Right.
That was because, it's fun to get out and play these songs for these people. Can he do it again? Will he do it again? I hope. I don't know. I think he'll do it as long as he can. And I haven't seen the Stones. If somebody said, here's a Stones ticket, I would certainly take it and go. They certainly don't need the money, but there's something that they're getting out of it that keeps them going. I think about this right now because I guess I'm at the age where the Beatles were in the 80s, right? So, because they're born all around 45, 46, pretty much, I think. And I'm in my 40s, and I'm I've got this sort of I don't know what I'm comfortable in my own skin. I know who I am. I certainly have things that annoy me. There are lawyers in my life, of course, and I still want to make stuff. I just want to make the stuff that I want to make. So I hopefully I'm not in my give my regards to Broad Street period, but I might be. But that's okay. I'll push through it. I'll get through to the next period.
But what's comforting about that is Paul McCartney had to give my regards to Broad Street phase.
Yeah.
Even the best go through all that. And that's part. I love the McCartney solo album, the first one, specifically just because Paul didn't know what he was doing.
No idea.
He just broke up with the Beatles and he just made stuff. And I love it just because I think we, as individuals, we find ourselves in that situation maybe often in your life where you're starting a new phase.
Absolutely. And I think making stuff and just being like, what am I going to do today? I'm going to get up and I'm going to make something. Having that's the mode where I'm in right now. And, just make stuff. And if I can make stuff with my friends, great. If I want to make stuff alone, great. Not worrying about these external forces are at play, or this is what's hip right now, or this is what the networks want, or this is what, is going to get me hired on some show. I don't want to operate that way. And look, I don't have Paul McCartney's money. I don't know. There's very few people that do, but I'm okay. I got a roof over my head. I got a family, take care of them, take care of myself, and buy a Beatles reissue every once in a while. Not all of them. Certainly, I'm not going to buy a Beatles First State Butcher cover. That would be a dumb purchase for me to make today. But I think the idea of just like you just make stuff and you take in the art around you. Like I know that McCartney, in the little downtime that he had, like was so a part of like the art scene in London, and like I can't say who, but everybody talks about Carnival of Light, the only unreleased Beatles song. I know someone who's got a copy of it.
Wow.
And I haven't heard it, but I'm like, well, what do you have a copy? And it's the only copy. The Beatles have a copy, obviously. And then my friend has a copy. And I go, what do you do with that? Have you played it? And then they said, yeah. And I'm like, well, what does it sound like? And it's like, it's music that was made for an art show. It's like a pastiche of, it's not like a song, And I go, that's interesting. What do you do with it? This is just my house. And I'm like, shouldn't that be in like a safe deposit box or something? And it's just so, but I haven't heard it. I should get in touch with that person, because I'm like, can't they play it over the phone for me? I'd like to hear Carnival of Light.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, just so I could say that I heard it. But that will, I don't know. It's not coming out for a reason. It's also like, I don't think there's anything left for the Beatles. Like all they can do is remix things and like use new technology. Perhaps we'll get Beatles holograms like we're getting with ABBA. I don't know. Like there's nothing left. Like there's at least that the public knows about. Everything has been put out, bootlegged. You could remix, you could remaster, but when I finished that Get Back documentary, I was like, well, that's it. This is all the Beatles we're going to have. This is the footage. This is the, of their 7 years together. This is it. So, close the chapter, close the book on the Beatles. This is it. Carnival of Light is a piece of music, and I think it's almost like Revolution number 9, like from what I've read about it. It was part of, Paul engaging with the exceptionally cool art world that he was a person in his 20s in a very specific time and place. And I, wonder about, because of the pandemic and just because, and maybe it's just my age right now. Just like there isn't, I don't feel the sense of community that I used to, like what I was talking about in my early 20s in New York City. There's a real sense of community and stuff. And first of all, I think it's impossible to live in Manhattan unless you are super wealthy. And I don't even know what, is going on there, So that, and then a pandemic, it's a very strange time, but I'm curious to see what art comes from it. You started this during the pandemic. So, so there you go. So that's a piece of art that was started in the pandemic, which is bringing a sense of community by going to this band that we're talking about that is sort of universally worldwide loved, analyzed, deconstructed. We're talking about it. We've never met each other. And we have this thing we can talk about in common, which is a complete familiarity with music that was made for 7 years that we're still listening to.
Yeah.
And, I don't know an equivalent to that. And I think that, I guess my point is that, like, I'm curious to see what happens with art, film, music, movies, TV. I'm curious to see what happens with all that, with a generation of younger people who didn't get to go to their prom, who spent the last couple years of their school years of like 16, 17, 18 years old doing it over Zoom or whatever because there was a pandemic, and like now they're at college, and like, where are we going? You know what I mean? Where are we going? And I don't know if the Beatles ever had the time to stop down and think, where are we going? They were just always had another, they just kept going.
Yeah.
Or maybe they did. I don't know. I wasn't there. And I can read as many books and I can see as much footage of them in the studio. And it's always going to be pure speculation because it's a, highly controlled sort of narrative, which they have to do because they're the, they were the most famous people. It's like Mickey Dolenz right now. I watched a piece with him yesterday, and he's out there singing monkey songs still. Why? Yeah, he loves it. He loves it. I was very lucky. I got to see Mike Nesmith's final performance just by pure luck. My friend John Lennon was like, "Do you want to go?" I was like, "Yes." And he knew Nesmith very well since he was young, and we were like, "This could be it," and it was it. That was it,
Mm-hmm.
And Mickey's still out there singing those songs, and I love the Monkees. Just we wouldn't have the Monkees without the Beatles, and the Monkees are great and should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it's stupid that they're not. But I don't know, man. You think there's a show here for people?
No, absolutely. I mean, like, I think now is very similar to like when the Beatles were making Sgt. Pepper and the White Album, like 1967, 1968, because that was like a huge point of like political turmoil, a bunch of change, summer of love. And I think now is very similar to that in that way.
Yeah. And, also like politically, which I'll, stay away from just because, quite frankly, I don't care to talk about it. But like, the Beatles were extremely political. And then, post the Beatles, the political became very personal for John Lennon, Nixon, and the CIA having a file on him because he got very involved in, the anti-war movement, and, it was hanging out with some real radicals, really, serious radicals, and, taken out a billboard, not just for the fact that they had a Christmas song to put out, but, war is over if you want it. Merry Christmas, from John and Yoko is a hell of a thing to put in Times Square, just putting the idea of like peace out there. And it's just like our world right now is so divided and so cynical that like, and I don't know how that would be received today. And I also don't know how, I just know, I called my mom and I talked to my dad before he passed, and I was just like, you guys are around in 67, 68, 69. Was it this, Martin Luther King being assassinated, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, was it this nuts? Did it feel this, like there was heat, there was riots at the Democratic National Convention, MC5, kick out the jams, motherfuckers. It was crazy. Did it feel like this? And they were like, nope, this is crazy.
Wow.
So that's alarming.
Yeah.
And I don't know who we, and then music consumption is so decentralized. It is not like, here's your radio stations, here, here's your 3 TV networks. It is, here is every song, every band that you could think of at your fingertips on a microcomputer in your pocket, and good luck.
Yeah.
So how do you break through that noise if you're an artist? And then also, how do you discover that music if you're a consumer? And it's all over the place. Like, I remember the feeling in the 90s. No, I guess it's the late 90s, early 2000s. But the Strokes and the White Stripes, that's happening. The
Yes.
Strokes in New York City. And I remember this feeling of like, oh, good. Rock music,
Yeah.
And yeah, these guys are cool. They do drugs, and they've heard a Velvet Underground album, and they're there, and it seems to be like taking off, and and there's a book called, there's two books. There's Please Kill Me, which is the uncensored oral history of punk, which covers UK and London and the punk scene that happened. And then there's another book called Meet Me in the Bathroom, which is the sort of New York scene, the Strokes and Ryan Adams yelling at each other. And that kind of ends in 2011. But there was this moment where I was like, oh, is rock music going to happen? And, it was exciting. And it did not happen. And it went very pop. It went very hip hop. And I mean, those bands were successful, but like they weren't, it's like the dominant music on the radio in the top 40 right now is mainly, it's not rock music, It's like, what's a rock band that it's, there's the Foo Fighters. Okay. I like Dave Grohl. I like the Foo. I got no problem, and they had such a tragedy with Taylor Hawkins, but like, I'm trying to think of like these bands that like, or even albums or solo artists that like unify us. And it's like, no, we've just been broken down into so many different social groups and subcultures and subgenres. And there's so many content delivery systems that you're never going to get everybody on the same page. You don't have to get everybody on the same page. It's this concept of broadcasting is dead because right now somebody's enjoying listening to this podcast and you don't need, 50 million people to tune in to watch the Ed Sullivan Show. It just won't happen again.
Right.
What do we have that is going to, you just need to get enough of your audience. That's all that it takes. Enough for it to be profitable. That's it. And boy, that's cool. There are huge upsides to that. You can make a living as an artist. It's also very splintered, and it's like, it would be nice if there was something that everybody's just like, we like this, we like it. We all agree on it. It has nothing to do with our politics. It has nothing to do with our identities or, it's just like, we all agree this is good. But I don't know what that is right now.
Yeah, everything's so divisive now. I really don't think we can come to a collective agreement on anything anymore. I think social media further propagates arguments because it gives everyone a platform and everyone thinks that their opinion is more important than the next person's.
People are addicted to arguing.
Yeah.
My friend Tom Sharpling said social media gives you the incredible feeling of accomplishing something when you've actually accomplished nothing.
Yeah.
You get an instant gratification system of this person liked it or retweeted it and stuff, and it's just like, but what is it really? And not to say that I haven't seen people do creative things and artful things with social media. I have also seen, I mean, for the first time ever, I had a friend, call me. I'm sort of known for being a person you can call like, oh, I'm drinking too much or I fell into drugs. And I have a good history of being like a person you can call and I'll be like, I'll talk to you about that. I'll help you out. What happened?
Right.
Because I've been through it myself and it's been many, many, many years now. And let me hear what you have to say. And for the first time I had a friend call me and I said, and they said, I have been off of Twitter for a year. And they had realized that they had become addicted to social media and the argument and they've been off it. They have since like done great things with their life and gone through some hard stuff too, but like they recognized that, oh, this is bad, and they eliminated it from their life and they're living a happier, healthier life today as a result. It's not everybody, but I think that there is, an argument addiction thing going on with that. And people need to reevaluate how they use social media. And, it's to bring it back to the Beatles. It's like John Lennon gives an interview, and in the context of a larger interview, you could grab the pull quote, "The Beatles are bigger than Jesus," which Danny Fields, who signed the MC5, who signed the Stooges, who managed the Ramones when he was, oops, he's the editor of a teen magazine. He pulls that story, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. The Beatles are bigger than Jesus, and the radio stations in the South are burning Beatle records. And then John Lennon, I'm not saying the greater than the Jesus as a personal thing, the famous quote, but like, it's like that, except every day.
Yeah.
About somebody or something else.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'll bring up a celebrity to my wife. She's like, "Oh yeah, they're canceled." And I'll be like, "For what?" And it's, something, I mentioned Lizzo, an artist. She didn't know. She's word spaz in a song. Okay. She apologized. Forgiven. But for a day, that was hell. Change the song, change the art, which is easy. I get it. It's really easy to not use that word and just like, and course correct and stuff. But like, to go back, like, just keep moving forward. Just keep moving.
It's so interesting how you could just revise music now. Like, I think back in 2016, Kanye West was the first artist to retroactively change his track list for his album The Life of Pablo.
I thought it was so interesting. I was like, well, why can't he? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's like he says it's done, what's not done. Like, the technology doesn't prevent him from doing it. Like, and I like Kanye. I got a stem player.
Oh, nice.
I got one of these stem players. I found that so interesting because Kanye, who absolutely, I don't agree with everything that comes out of his mouth. I really don't. And, and sometimes I worry about Kanye. Sometimes his music is he's always going to do something. I want to hear it because it's interesting. At least there's something interesting there. So I always want to see what Kanye is up to. And then there's people also, we're going to talk about Kanye. I will say, at this point, if you are insulting the Kardashians or being like the Kardashians are stupid or the Kardashians are worthless, like, it's been a decade. They have these extremely successful businesses. Kim Kardashian is doing work to get people wrongfully on death row, using her celebrity and the situation that she is in to get people off of death row that should not be executed, to get people out of jail who are in for a joint. You know what I mean? Which every Beatle can relate to because they all got busted, because of that crooked cop. It's like, you can't dismiss them as being stupid. They aren't stupid. They are a different kind of celebrity, and they are masters of the game of that type of entertainment. And it's like, nobody with that much money is a stupid person. You may not like their art or their products or whatever. Fine. You want to criticize that, but you can't call them stupid. It's like, I agree with everything Elon Musk says and does too, but I'm like, he's not a stupid guy. He might say some stupid things. And I also think that, like, and I'm sure this is hell for the Beatles too, especially in the 60s, and of like, well, you can't say that because you're a Beatle, like, especially for John, who was not someone to hold his tongue back. It seems like to me, if the Beatles, had Twitter, if they actively, like, if that was part, like, if they had to make TikToks like the way that artists do now, I think that they probably would have come up with some really interesting, funny things, quirky, funny things, because they had a very quirky, funny sense of humor influenced by the Goons and all that stuff. But also, how many statements would John have made? How many angry tweets? How many, like in this psychotic news cycle that people are putting themselves into, by the way. You don't have to do it.
Right.
Really easy to just put your phone down.
Yes.
But apparently maybe it's not, because I had a friend who's like, it was an addiction. And I'm curious to see where that goes. But just in terms of the human brain and what it's doing, but like,
I think it's hard for people my age because, especially post COVID, because like in 1966, Paul was walking around London, going to the avant-garde art scenes in like art galleries and everything, and meeting interesting people and artists and making connections. I think now a lot of connections are being made online, and for better or for worse. I think that it's good that people are advancing their lives with those connections built, but I think at the same time, a lot of those connections or just stimuli have this negative feedback cycle because people my age see people doing cool things online, and that's all they see. They don't see hard work, they don't see any of that. So they start to compare, and it becomes an addictive cycle for them. And it makes it hard to put the phone down.
Yeah, it's the negative feedback cycle has to get broken at a certain point. A metaphor that I think of is like, it's like the world is having a temper tantrum. It's like the world's a giant toddler, and eventually what happens with a toddler having a temper tantrum, eventually they tire themselves out and they fall asleep.
Right.
And they pass out. And I'm just kind of waiting for the world to like finish having this temper tantrum, and then, like calm down and be like, okay, global warming, we should deal with that. Yeah. What? Oh shit, it's too late. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no. Well, all right. Well, since it's 130 degrees out, I I just, I don't have any answers. I never claim to have any answers. I have answers about very, very specific things. And again, they're usually just opinions, and most of the time they're right. But
Right.
but yeah, I do know that my experience with people that are your age is they are either deeply into social media or they don't have it at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just like one or the other, which I think it's an amazing thing that what you've done is it's just like, well, I'm interested in this and I know a lot about this, and I'm just going to feed out this, and it's going to serve this purpose to this obviously large fan base. And then to take that to the next level and be like, well, let's talk about this band. Let's talk about this stuff that I'm posting, on this day, or, here's this photo. Like, that's good. That's good. That's it. It's productive, because now you are having these productive, engaging conversations, which start talking about a band, and then just start veering into art and culture and everything. And it's just like, thank God we have the Beatles as this sort of agreed upon touchstone, which starts with just really great songs. Like, if they just didn't have the talent, time, pressure, set of circumstances, just whatever the confluence of events that created the Beatles, we wouldn't have the body of work, the reason to communicate and discuss it, which leads us to other things.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have the great Robert Zemeckis movie, I Want to Hold Your Hand, which is the ultimate Beatlemania movie about kids trying to get into the Ed Sullivan Show, really funny movie. And we wouldn't have the Sgt. Pepper movie, which is just, again, people in Hollywood with too much cocaine and too much money.
Yeah.
Just being like, well, the Beatles, people like the Beatles. Yeah. call Sean out. It's just bizarre.
Yeah, that's very true. And like the Beatles are like one of the only things that mostly everyone can agree on, with the exception of contrarians, obviously.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm very glad that you have those thoughts about this podcast, because that's exactly what I was trying to do. You know, just bring a bunch of people together and tell this collective tale about how this band has changed the world on a personal level for everybody. Like even decades after they've broken up.
It's been a real long time since they put out a new track.
Yeah.
It's not as long as you think. It was Free as a Bird, and what was the other one?
Yeah, I am as old as the song "Free as a Bird." Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that-
there was real love too.
Yeah, Real Love, which I think was kind of like both of them were good. It was but again, there's no more Beatles left. It's just like, this is it. I think there's all they can do now is just bring out more of what is on the tapes of the 230 some songs they have.
Yeah,
And it'll be interesting. Like, I know I'll play the Beatles for my kid, and I'm very curious to see I'm curious to see my child's face, period. But I'm curious to see my child's face the first time it hears the Beatles and what they're, because I know that it's like 99% chance the kid's gonna like it.
yeah.
I just
Oh,
have yet to
absolutely.
see a little kid that doesn't. So, your first question of like, I don't remember consciousness without this music. I'm jealous of people who got to experience life and then have the Beatles come out, and like, that is fascinating to me. There was a time before the Beatles, and and like, I mean, I'm also fascinated by anybody who's like, I came home and put on my Little Richard record, and it scared the hell out of my parents, because like nothing sounds like Little Richard, and that's the stuff that influenced the Beatles or Little Richard. Like, yeah, this is it, man, and it's still it.
Yeah.
It's still it. Those records are still shocking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How,
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
we went back to the source,
Yeah.
which is Little Richard. One thing I'll say is skiffle, I think, is if that's not a real music genre. I think that the Beatles invented that as a joke. They were like, let's tell people there's a thing called skiffle music, and then they made it up. Skiffle never. Skiffy, it's a conspiracy theory.
Well, Jake, thanks so much for coming on. I loved that conversation.
Thank you, Jack. This is a pleasure. I always like talking about the Beatles, and you're a good guy to do it with.
Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Here, There, and Everywhere podcast. Thank you to Jake for coming on the show. You can follow Jake on Twitter and Instagram at Jake Fogelnest. And also be sure to follow at Beatles Earth on pretty much every social media for more content. And I'll see you next week with a brand new guest.